March 15th, 1944. At the Japanese Naval Intelligence Headquarters, the Oda Communications Unit, Commander Atsuku Kurihara studied the intercepted signal, his third cup of strong tea now cold and forgotten. For 18 hours, he and his elite team of codebreakers had struggled to decipher what was clearly an American Marine Corps transmission originating from the Marshall Islands campaign. The signals that hissed from their receivers resisted every method of decryption they possessed. This was not chaotic sounds. The rhythm pointed to organized military traffic, its timing aligned with enemy offensives, its length matching operational commands, its frequencies consistent with Marine procedure. Yet the language itself remained a total mystery, unlike any Allied code in their vast archives. Kurihara led one of the planet's most advanced signal intelligence units. The Oda complex, situated 20 miles from Tokyo, housed 500 staff members manning over 100 radio receivers and 20 direction-finding systems. Its analysts had cracked American diplomatic ciphers, broken British naval codes, and solved numerous Army signals. They had penetrated the State Department's Purple Code before the war began, delivering vital intelligence in those early victorious years. But these Marine communications represented an absolute and humiliating defeat. 3 years into the conflict, after shattering dozens of Allied codes, Japan's finest cryptographic minds could detect no pattern, no weakness in these baffling transmissions. What Kurihara could not know, what no Japanese officer would ever learn until the war's end, was that he was hearing the only code in modern warfare that would never be broken. This story starts not over the Pacific, but in the American Southwest, where the Navajo people had safeguarded a language unique on Earth for centuries. Dine Bizad, the Navajo tongue, is part of the Athabascan family. In 1940, it was spoken by about 170,000 people, almost entirely within the 27,000 square mile reservation stretching across Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. The linguistic traits that would confound the enemy had developed over the ages. Navajo is built around verbs, with actions expressed through intricate prefix combinations that can run into the millions. The language uses 4 distinct tones: high, low, rising, falling, where a pitch shift can completely alter a word's meaning. A slight mispronunciation doesn't just create an error, it can make a phrase utterly incoherent. Its sound system contains phonemes absent from Japanese, English, and most other languages. Ejective consonants, formed by a burst of air from the glottis. A voiceless lateral fricative, like a sharp breath through clenched teeth. Glottalized sonorants, and nasalized vowels. For Japanese linguists, trained in a language of simple vowel sounds, accurately perceiving these nuances was nearly impossible. One man understood the military value of this linguistic fortress. Philip Johnston, born in 1892 to a missionary family on the Navajo reservation, grew up speaking the language fluently. He was one of perhaps 30 outsiders in the world who could make that claim. By 9, he was translating his father's sermons. By 15, he had journeyed to Washington to interpret for Navajo leaders, even meeting President Theodore Roosevelt. In December 1941, as America staggered from the attack on Pearl Harbor, Johnston read a report about Army units experimenting with Comanche speakers during training in Louisiana. The Choctaw had served as code talkers in the First World War, but those operations were small and improvised.
Johnston envisioned something far greater. A formal, systematic military code built upon the Navajo language, designed to be both unbreakable and swift. On February 28, 1942, Johnston proposed his idea to Major General Clayton Vogel at Camp Elliott near San Diego. The demonstration was decisive. 4 Navajo men from Los Angeles sent messages while Marine officers timed them against standard encryption machines. The Navajo transmission took 20 seconds. The mechanical cipher took 30 minutes. General Vogel immediately approved a pilot program. On May 4, 1942, 29 Navajo recruits were sworn in at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. These men, Chester Nez, Carl Gorman, Lloyd Oliver, and John Benally among them, came from across the reservation. Some had endured boarding schools where their native tongue was forbidden and punished. Others were traditional herders who had seldom traveled beyond their ancestral homelands. At Camp Elliott, they were secluded in a secure, guarded building for 8 weeks, tasked with an immense undertaking, to build a military code from their ancient language. They had to invent terms for modern weapons and tactics that had no equivalent in Navajo, design an alphabet system, and ensure it was both memorable and adaptable. They constructed the code using cultural wisdom. A submarine became Beshluo, an iron fish swimming deep. A battleship was Lotso, a whale ruling the seas. Fighter planes were Dahetihihi, hummingbirds moving with swift grace. Bombers were Jaisho, buzzards circling above their prey. The alphabet demanded special ingenuity. Each English letter was assigned multiple Navajo words to thwart frequency analysis. The letter E, the most common in English, was given 4 different Navajo equivalents. For the letter Z, they used words like Dibitza, elk, Anai, war, and Tsiini, hare. The Code Talkers would switch between these options at random, shattering any chance of pattern recognition. They created an initial lexicon of 211 terms, committing every one to flawless memory. No physical codebook was ever made. The risk of capture was too great. Chester Nez would later remember, "We trained without rest. A single error could mean the death of fellow Marines. In our tradition, words hold immense power. To speak them with precision was a sacred duty." Their first trial by fire came at Guadalcanal in August of 1942. 15 Code Talkers hit the beaches with the 1st Marine Division. The Japanese, having broken other Allied ciphers, were prepared for the assault. But suddenly, the tactical chatter of the Marines became an impenetrable wall of sound. At the Japanese 8th Fleet headquarters in Rabaul, intelligence officers were thrown into confusion. Lieutenant Kazuo Yamada, who had studied at Stanford before the war, reported, "The transmissions have the rhythm and structure of human speech, yet they correspond to no known tongue, not English, French, Dutch, Spanish, or any dialect from the Philippines or China. It is utterly alien." The Japanese response was swift and thorough. They assigned their top cryptanalysts to the problem, recording hundreds of hours of transmissions on wax cylinders and applying every decryption method they knew. They consulted university linguists and even Buddhist monks versed in ancient scripts. Nothing yielded a result. On November 8, 1942, Code Talker Chester Nez sent the coordinates for an enemy machine gun nest. His transmission lasted 14 seconds. Japanese operators intercepted it, but to them, it was only meaningless noise. Minutes later, American artillery shells found their mark with devastating accuracy. Colonel Haruko Konuma, an intelligence officer with the 17th Army, wrote in frustration, "The Americans are using a code that defies all our efforts. We can no longer predict their movements. We are fighting blind." Joe Kailoma, a Navajo soldier captured at Bataan in April 1942, became Japan's best chance to crack the code. Though fluent in his native language, he knew nothing of the secret military code. When Japanese cryptographers began intercepting the strange transmissions, they brought Kailoma to the Ana Interrogation Center. They played him recordings of the Code Talkers. He heard Navajo words, but their combinations were nonsensical. The turtle is attacking the iron fish. The hummingbird carries eggs. When he could not provide a translation, his interrogators accused him of deception. The torture that followed was systematic and brutal. It escalated over many months. He was subjected to water torture, severe beatings, and hung by his arms for hours. In the winter of 1943, they forced him to stand naked in the snow until his feet froze to the ground. He was starved down to 90 pounds, with food offered only in exchange for cooperation. Through it all, Kailoma could only tell the same truth. He understood the words, but not their hidden military meaning. A Japanese intelligence report from May 1943 noted their profound frustration. The prisoner appears to be a native speaker of the mystery language, but cannot decipher the messages. Assessment, either extraordinary resistance, or the enemy uses a specialized code within the native language that requires specific training. The latter was correct. Even a fluent Navajo speaker could not penetrate the code without having been trained in it. Kailoma survived 3.5 years of captivity, and his inability to health ultimately convinced Japanese intelligence they were facing something entirely unprecedented. By late 1943, they had largely abandoned efforts to decode the Navajo transmissions. The success at Guadalcanal led to the program's rapid expansion. Major General Alexander Vandergrift wrote, "The Navajo communicators have proven themselves indispensable. Their transmissions are faster than any mechanical device and remain completely secure." A formal Code Talkers school was established at Camp Pendleton, graduating a new class every 8 weeks. By war end, between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines had served as Code Talkers across all 6 Marine divisions. Their training was unique in the history of Decor. Recruits practiced in soundproof booths while instructors simulated the chaos of the battlefield. They transmitted messages while wearing gas masks and running to the point of exhaustion. Thomas Bale, who enlisted at just 15, described it. "They drove us past our breaking point. The lives of our brothers depended on our absolute precision." The code itself was a living entity, constantly evolving. New weapons required new words. The atomic bomb became Atsabitsini, metal egg. Kamikaze pilots were Niltsa, death wind. Each edition was logically consistent to a Navajo speaker, yet remained an undecipherable mystery to any outside listener.
By mid-1943, Japanese intelligence was dedicating massive resources to the problem. The Imperial Navy's 4th Section assigned 30 cryptanalysts to work on nothing but these transmissions. Captain Yoshiro Tanaka pursued every possible avenue. He attempted musical analysis to detect tonal patterns, compared the signals to archival recordings of Native American languages, and consulted with academics who had studied in the United States. His team engineered specialized recording gear to slow the transmissions without altering their pitch. They used oscilloscopes to create visual representations of the sound and applied rigorous statistical analysis to its frequencies and rhythms. Lieutenant Commander Masao Yamada would later admit they had discerned certain patterns, likely call signs, and a correlation between a message's length and the scale of the operation it preceded. But without comprehending the words themselves, these fragments were virtually useless. Japanese units were given explicit orders to capture Marine communications personnel alive. A bounty of 10,000 yen, a decade's salary, was offered for any code-related equipment or documents. There were several narrow escapes, but no code talker was ever captured with their materials. The Central Pacific Campaign cemented the code talker's strategic value. At Tarawa in November 1943, 6 men maintained a continuous communication link through 76 hours of hellish combat. Lloyd Oliver transmitted for 48 consecutive hours, directing naval gunfire while enemy shells rained down around his position. During the Marianas Campaign, 24 code talkers worked non-stop on Saipan. Lieutenant Commander Takashi Hirakawa had broken conventional codes to predict the invasion, but the moment the Marines landed, his flow of tactical intelligence vanished. Colonel Takashi Saito observed, "Our commanders felt abandoned, stripped of the intelligence they had come to rely upon." On Peleliu, code talker Jimmy King transmitted for 6 hours during a fierce counterattack after his partner was killed. Under direct enemy fire, he coordinated the artillery of 3 different battalions, sending 40 messages without a single mistake. The battle for Iwo Jima would become their ultimate testament. Major Howard Connor directed the entire initial assault using only the Navajo code. 6 code talkers, working in shifts, maintained an unbroken stream of communication throughout the invasion's decisive first 48 hours. The Japanese commander, General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, had prepared for 2 years, building a vast underground fortress connected by 11 miles of tunnels. His entire defensive strategy depended on intercepting American radio traffic to time his devastating counterattacks. This plan collapsed entirely. In those first 2 days, the 6 code talkers sent and received over 800 messages without a single error. They coordinated the landing of 30,000 Marines, naval gunfire from 100 ships, close air support, enemy positions, medical evacuations, supply requests, and tactical orders, all while fighting for their own survival under relentless fire. Major Connor would later state unequivocally, without the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. He elaborated, throughout the initial 48 hours, I had 6 Navajo radio nets operating continuously. In that time, they sent and received more than 800 messages without a single inaccuracy. The entire invasion was commanded using the Navajo code. Colonel Shigego Hayashi reported to General Kurabayashi that the American ciphers remained a complete mystery. A request for artillery support, relayed in Navajo and completed in 20 seconds, would have required half an hour using standard encryption. That difference was the margin between annihilating an enemy position and being overrun by it. At Okinawa, 35 Code Talkers coordinated the Pacific's largest amphibious assault, involving 183,000 troops across 82 days of relentless combat. Japanese forces tried jamming their frequencies and even attempted voice mimicry, but they could not replicate the unique tonal qualities of the Navajo language. Lieutenant Hiroshi Miyamoto's efforts to imitate the transmissions were described by Code Talker Alfred Newman as the sound of a man gargling while trying to speak. On August 14, 1945, Code Talker Teddy Draper sent out the war's most momentous message, Nenajia Adedlini, the Japanese surrender. This historic announcement was transmitted in Navajo before it was sent through regular channels, a final, fitting tribute to the code that had served so well. After Japan's surrender, American interrogators uncovered the full scope of the enemy's efforts and their total defeat. Lieutenant General Shizo Arisu, Japan's chief of military intelligence, confessed, "We never broke the Marine Code. We broke Army codes, Air Force codes, and diplomatic ciphers, but the Marine Tactical Code was entirely secure." Captain Yasuji Kawamoto was more specific. "We recorded thousands of their transmissions. Our finest linguists analyzed them for 3 years. Nothing worked. It was our most significant cryptographic failure." As early as 1944, their analysis had noted that the tonal patterns resembled indigenous American languages. They even sought assistance from their German allies, but the difficulties of wartime cooperation and German unfamiliarity with the language prevented any breakthrough. Colonel Masao Yamada conceded the strategic cost. "Our failure to read Marine communications cost us thousands of lives. Every Marine operation after 1942 was a mystery until it was already upon us." Major Hiroshi Tanaka described the psychological toll. "We could not comprehend their words. It made us feel primitive, as if we were already defeated before the fighting even started." The war's end did not lift the burden from the Code Talkers. The program was kept classified, held in reserve for potential use in the Cold War. These men returned to a homeland where they could not speak of their service to anyone. They came back to states that denied them the right to vote, until 1948 in Arizona and New Mexico, and until 1957 in Utah. They were often refused service in hotels and restaurants. They were heroes who were forbidden from revealing their own heroism. Chester Nez, the last of the original 29 who passed away in 2014, wrote, "We were warriors who helped win the war, but we could not tell a soul. That weight was heavy to carry." Many sought peace through traditional ceremonies. The Enemy Way ceremony was performed to purify warriors from the spiritual contamination of combat. Den Erke explained, "We had used our sacred language to direct death. Now we needed it for healing. These ceremonies reminded us that our words were holy."
The program was finally declassified in 1968. Their first public recognition came a year later at a 4th Marine Division reunion. President Ronald Reagan established August 14, 1982, as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. The highest honor arrived on July 26, 2001, when President George W. Bush presented the Congressional Gold Medal to the original 29 in the Capitol Rotunda. Only 5 of the first group remained alive to witness the ceremony. President Bush stated, "Today we pay tribute to 29 Native Americans who rendered a service to their nation that only they could give." Chester Nez responded on their behalf, saying, "We were common men entrusted with an uncommon mission. We wielded our sacred language as a weapon to help secure victory." While the Navajos are the most renowned, 14 other tribes contributed Code Talkers. The Choctaw had pioneered the idea in the First World War. In the Second, 17 Comanche Code Talkers served in the European theater, landing on the beaches of Normandy. Hopi, Cherokee, Lakota, and others also offered their languages. The 2008 Code Talkers Recognition Act formally acknowledged the contributions of all these tribes. As John Brown Jr. noted, "They once told us our language was worthless. Then they discovered they needed it to win the war." The code demonstrated the profound sophistication of Native American languages. The Code Talkers modernized Navajo in real time, crafting new grammatical structures and adapting traditional metaphors for military use. Its agglutinative nature allowed complex ideas to be conveyed in single words. What required entire sentences in English became concise Navajo phrases. Dr. William Morgan observed, "They proved that indigenous languages are not primitive. They demonstrated that Navajo was fully capable of expressing everything from ancient ceremonies to modern warfare." The Navajo Code introduced a new form of security, cultural encryption, protected by linguistic barriers that no mathematical formula could surmount. This concept influenced post-war intelligence and remains relevant today as quantum computing threatens to render conventional ciphers obsolete. Colonel David Hatch assessed, "They accomplished something singular, a code that was never broken, never compromised. It proved that human linguistic ingenuity could surpass even the most advanced mechanical encryption." In the 1980s, Japanese scholars began to examine their failure. Professor Takeo Yoshikawa revealed that 30 cryptanalysts had worked exclusively on the transmissions for 2 years, consulting with multiple universities. Captain Minoru Yamada stated, "We knew it was a Native American language by late 1943, but we could not determine which one." Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Fukumoto admitted, "The solution, using a native tongue, was so simple, so elegant, that it never occurred to us." During the 1990s, photographer Kenji Kawano documented the surviving Code Talkers. His exhibitions in Tokyo and Hiroshima brought the story to Japanese audiences. Code Talker Albert Smith told them, "We were both warriors. My language helped to defeat you, but now it can help us to understand one another." At a 2010 symposium of the Japanese Association of Intelligence Studies, Admiral Hiroaki Abe reflected, "The Navajo Code represents a perfect encryption. We possessed the finest code breakers in Asia, and yet we were utterly defeated." Chester Nez, the last of the original 29, passed away on June 4, 2014. Today, only 2 Code Talkers survive from the roughly 400 who served, Thomas H. Bial and Peter McDonald. Though not from the first group, they were crucial to the Code's operational success. Peter McDonald, still speaking publicly at 96, asserts, "We showed that America's strength is born from its diversity. Our different languages and cultures make us more powerful. The Navajo language, once suppressed, is now recognized for its strategic importance." Federal funding initiatives often reference the Code Talkers, and young Native Americans now study their ancestral tongues with renewed pride. Dr. Jennifer Denethale observed, "The Code Talkers transformed how Native Americans view themselves and how America views Native Americans. They proved our languages are not relics for a museum, but living, vital resources." The Navajo Code Talkers secured one of military history's most extraordinary achievements, an unbreakable code that baffled Japanese intelligence for the entire war. Between 375 and 420, Navajo Marines served, sending tens of thousands of flawless messages under fire. The deeper meaning, however, lies in what they symbolized. American Indians used their native tongue, a language the government had once tried to eradicate, to defend the nation itself. Young men from marginalized communities provided a capability that sophisticated allies could not replicate. Japan's failure was not merely tactical, but a fundamental blindness. They had prepared for American technology and standard codes, but not for American diversity. They could not comprehend the languages and cultures they encountered. The empire that proclaimed racial superiority was defeated in part by that very diversity. Lieutenant General Ari Sue's admission that Japan never broke the code acknowledges an enemy whose strength sprang from sources they could not fathom. The Code Talkers embodied an America that Japan's ideology could not accommodate. They proved that the nation's greatest strength was not its industrial might, but its human variety. Linguistic diversity became a strategic advantage. The Navajo language that boarding schools tried to erase became a key to victory in the Pacific. Today, as the last Code Talkers pass into history, their legacy endures. The once forbidden language is now taught with pride. Native American veterans are recognized for serving at the highest per capita rate. The idea that diversity strengthens national security is now accepted doctrine. The voices that spoke Navajo across Pacific battlefields carried a timeless message. America's power comes from its many voices, from people and languages united in purpose but strengthened by their differences. The unbroken code stands as proof that our differences are not weaknesses, but strengths to be celebrated, preserved, and deployed in the cause of freedom. The Japanese intelligence officers who failed understood this best. Their defeat acknowledged a truth that transcends warfare. Some codes are unbreakable, not because of mathematical complexity, but because of the infinite complexity of human culture itself. The Code Talkers sent messages Japan never decoded, but their ultimate message was universal. Diversity brings strength. Culture brings power. Indigenous knowledge serves modern purposes. These young Navajo men who used a sacred language first as a weapon and then as an instrument of peace proved for all time that America's greatest encryption is its diversity itself, unbreakable because it emerges from the limitless well of human experience and wisdom. The unbroken code lives on. It lives in every Native child who speaks an ancestral language with pride, in every recognition that minority contributions fortify our national identity, and in every understanding that our differences make us stronger together. The Code Talkers proved that our distinctions are strengths to be honored. They are eternal proof that many voices, many people, and many languages, united in their diversity, create the unbreakable code of freedom itself.